Hey YouTube, this is Jonathan. I'm back doing another video concerning Sicilian. Sorry, I was a little bit ahead of myself there. If you guys remember from my earlier videos when we were talking about the Sicilian, I was mostly concerned with the e5 break that white often plays against the Scheveningen system with the e6 and d6 pawns. Today we're going to start talking about black's d5 break, which is a really thematic break in a lot of Sicilian structures. And I thought the best place to start would be looking at situations where white has tried to set up this English attack, because a very early d5 against that is extremely effective. So the English attack, of course, is a system in the open Sicilian where white is going to play bishop to e3, queen to d2, he's going to try to castle long, usually play f3, and then just storm with these pawns, which is quite a dangerous attack. I remember when I used to play e4 from the white side, my best chess buddy always played the dragon, and so I always got to play the Yugoslav attack, which is essentially the same thing, just black is going to have this pawn on g6 instead of on e6 or something like that. But I remember that my play always seemed incredibly straightforward. I just storm these pawns down the board, sack a pawn, sack a piece, and then just checkmate. And so whenever I decided to pick up the Sicilian from the black side, I was really worried about this attacking formation. But I was happy to find that when I was looking into the Sicilian Kan a bit deeper, that this is not a problem. Because of this early d5 break that black is going to get, there's no danger in the English attack from the black side of this. So let's get into it and take a look. So e4, c5, knight f3. This is just a typical Sicilian, open Sicilian. Notice it's important that we played e6 instead of d6. All of the stuff we're about to talk about doesn't work when the lines we play in early d6, like the Najdorf or some other lines like that. So with c takes, knight takes, a6, and now knight to c3 and queen to c7. And so here white can play bishop to e3, which honestly isn't that great of a move, but frankly, I face this about half the time that I reach this position. So white is just going to try to play this queen d2 and castle long, play f3, just like we were talking about earlier. But black has a reply here that he doesn't have in many other Sicilians, because often he's either developed the bishop to g6, or sorry, g7, or he's played d6, or in the case of the Taimanov, he's played knight to c6, meaning that the queen isn't going to have pressure here. So we're going to get a lot of pressure against this c3 point, meaning the e4 is going to be weak. So we play bishop to b4. So if white tries to continue on with his normal setup, he can play queen to d2, but here we're just going to be able to play knight to f6 and have some real pressure here. Now there's a few other things that white could try instead of queen d2, but none of them are very good. He can play a3, which against a3 we can just take, and we win a pawn outright. And not just that, but he's forced to play queen to e2 because anything else loses material. So we're up a pawn, and that king ain't happy. So this clearly is not an option to try to deal with this threat. Honestly, the best thing that he can really do is to play knight to e2, which is quite an ugly move, but frankly, it's the best. It's the best that he can happen. But even so, even after this knight e2 idea, white is gonna, or excuse me, black's gonna get some extra time to try to develop. He'll probably play knight f6. If white decides to kick it, he just drops the bishop back to e7, and he can claim that he's won a tempo here, because white often wants to do without this a3 move. There is a way to sort of avoid this option, and some people advocate that instead of the immediate bishop b4, that you play knight to f6 first. The idea is that after queen to d2, now bishop b4, and this knight e2 resource just isn't there anymore because of the pressure we already have on e4. And now just a3 here, it just drops a pawn because we just take on e4. If he captures here, we take his queen, of course. He can't capture here because we take his queen. And so this is just quite an awful situation. So going back, looking at the move order with bishop to b4 first, play bishop b4, and then after queen d2, sorry, not that, we played queen d2. Notice also that a3 doesn't work here very well either. After a3, we're just going to take back. He takes here, we take with the queen, and again, that situation where the king had to move up. So queen d d2, And now knight f6, which is going to add pressure here on e4, and he's got to do something about that. The most common way that people respond to this is with f3. And now we get the key moment. We slam with d5, which adds more pressure to e4. Notice the pressure we're putting on c3 has weakened e4, and we also have good control of this e5 square thanks to this queen c7 maneuver, meaning that e5 is not going to be an option, which is often the case that white wants to meet d5 with e5, but here's just frankly not possible. It's just going to drop a pawn. So after d5, the best that he can probably do is just to capture it, and we take back with the knight, and we've completely decimated his pawn center, and we're probably also going to be able to trade out this dark squared bishop, which is meaning that he's lost his center and one powerful attacking piece. So black really can't be too unhappy with this situation. Here in this game that we're looking at, white tries to maintain his center and this pressure against the pawn by playing bishop to d3. And this actually just drops a piece. It's quite nice. So, excuse me. We just play e5, and he can't avoid the loss of a piece here. If he drops the knight back, we're just going to push forward with this fork, and if he captures here, we're just going to take it anyway. Here, white chose to play just castles long, just thinking that he's going to try to develop quickly and get some pressure going and hopefully complicate the game. But here, black made somewhat of an odd decision. He decides to take on e4. I suppose his idea is that he thinks that white is just going to capture back anyway, one way or the other, and then he's going to be able to win this piece here. I have a hard time understanding why you wouldn't just win the piece immediately. So after we just grab the piece, he's going to take back here. We'll probably capture this way. And sure, black is going to get his king side messed up a little bit. But after this capture, and now bishop to e6, white is going to pick up this pawn on b7 because we can't leave control of the d8 square. But we're still up a piece, and it's really not clear to me that black's king is in any more danger than white's king. So I have a hard time understanding why you wouldn't go in for this. You have an extra piece. The opponent's king is pretty messed up as well. He's got these weak pawns on the open c file. I feel like that this had to be the right way to go. Perhaps he just overlooked the response that white came up with in the game, which frankly is still losing, but it does manage to complicate things a bit more than was probably necessary. So after he takes with d takes e4, white strikes with this bishop b5, which is a nice idea. We don't really want to take it. We can. It's okay, but it's complicated. After a takes, we get the knight's going to jump in. We have to play queen a5 because we have to stay in touch with this d8 square. And then after knight d6 check, the bishop needs to come back, and then the queen's going to take. And our king is starting to look a little bit uncomfortable here. He can't really castle yet. So you probably want to avoid this, but you still are up a piece for that matter. So it's probably okay. Instead of taking the piece, stronger is oops, I went back too far. Stronger is just to play knight to d7, which is developing, blocking the check. It's a better move. And then after the bishop takes, we take back, and then knight b3. And so we see here after rook to c8, another nice feature of the Sicilian Kan. With this queen already on c7, when white castles long, we already have ready-made pressure because the queen's already on the c-file. The rook's going to be able to quickly get there. Plus, with this bishop having the ability to go out to b4, we can generate lots of pressure on c3. We don't even need a rook sack on c3, which is pretty common. We're going to get enough pressure there anyway. Notice that white is totally in command of this position. Or, excuse me, not white. Black's totally in command. White hasn't even begun his pawn storm yet, and it's not clear how effective it would be anyway, because our king isn't even over there. So this is just clearly showing that even if we didn't go for the line where we won a piece, we're going to get tremendous pressure against against white's king side, or queen side position, his king on the queen side rather. So he's just never going to be able to get this attack going that he wants on the king side. So he plays out here to bishop to g5, and I think that the next move was probably a bit too hasty, but I can see why he was anxious to try to make trades here on c3 and get these queens off the board. He's worried about this pressure against d7. He plays bishop to c3, but I think it might have been better to capture here on f3 first. After b takes c3, it was definitely better to take on f3 first. He chose to take with the queen here because he's anxious to trade queens, and I get that. But after e takes f5, f3, he's going to capture here, and yeah, he's going to get the g file open. But after bishop f5, which now we're threatening to really capture here because the bishop wouldn't be hanging anymore, he's going to have to play something like king to b2 to avoid dropping this pawn. And black has this straightforward plan of just playing a4, a5, and eventually maybe even king a3. He's going to be able to shove the knight back, shove the king back, and get some real pressure here along the c file. And even if a5, white plays a4, we can just play b4 even. And we're going to potentially be able to open more lines here on the king side. So it's definitely black who's in the driver's seat. Yeah, the g file is open, but black is just as likely to get to use the g file as white is. There's just too much pressure here for white to be worried about trying to do something on the g file where the king isn't even at. So I think this was probably a better option. But again, I totally understand why you, in this situation, you'd want to just try to get the queens off the board. And so in that mind, he captures here on c3. He's winning a pawn after all, so he can't be that upset. So the bishop captures here. And now queen takes d2 is forced because if we take with the g pawn first, well, then we're going to lose this bishop on e7 and probably maybe even the, yeah, we're going to lose the rook there too, and I think we're going to get mated. Or something very similar to that. So, of course, you trade queens, but after this take, we take here, he's going to grab this way, and we are healthy pawn up. So we've got this extra pawn. White has horrible pawns. He's got this weak guy, this weak guy, this weak guy. We clearly have the better minor piece with all these pieces on both sides, or excuse me, all these pawns on both sides of the board. Our bishop is going to be much, much stronger, and our pawn structure is definitely more solid than the white side. Sorry, I was laughing at myself. I had a little Dustin Hoffman moment there. So king e7, just connecting the rooks. And now rook h to d1, and now bishop to g4. I mean, his idea is that he wants to force him to undouble his rooks, but I don't think that was necessary. We have d7 firmly under control, and obviously the 8th rank is under control as well. So I think that just putting the bishop on e6, which is going to guard this f7 point, is probably better. White just comes over to the f file, and see, he's going to get some pressure on the f file, so we're going to need to defend f7 at some point anyway. And now rook c4. Rook c4 is a nice move. We're preparing to double to hit further against c2. We're hitting this weak pawn on e4, and we also have the option of coming over here and hitting this weak pawn as well. So after the rooks double here, we play rook h to c8. So if he captures f6, we're probably going to meet that with rook takes on c2. So he plays knight to a5, thinking that he's going to hit this pawn here and try to kick our rook out of the way. I suppose he thinks that we're just going to retreat the rook somewhere and he's going to be able to take on f6. But white comes up with rook to a4. It was also probably possible just to capture on e4. But this sets a nice little trap. This pawn on b7 is actually immune. Take a look at this for a second and see if you can see why the pawn is immune. I'm gonna assume that you're back with me if you paused. And knight takes b7, and now just a simple rook to c7, and the knight is out of squares. Our king nicely covers these two, and both c5 and a4 are covered by the knight. So after rook takes f6, which is a sort of a last-ditch effort, just hoping we're going to capture the knight and allow rook takes f7, but black's a little bit better of a player than that. He just plays bishop to e6. And now the knight is hopeless. We're gonna win some pawns. We're gonna win a piece that we should have won several moves ago, and we're gonna win several pawns after that. We don't have anything to fear on the f file since our bishop is guarding that. The game's just over. So quite a nice display of what can happen if white is really dead set on trying to issue this English attack and castle long. We just add all kinds of pressure to c3, which allows us to add pressure to e4. We get our d5 break, we get the lines open where we want them open, and we're able to expose the king. Notice that this h and g pawn, which are sort of the main idea in the English attack, never even moved. So let's go back and take a quick look at that moment where we played d5 to see if we can notice anything about the position to help us understand when we should play d5. Here, the main trumps, I think, in the position that really help us determine it's a good idea to play d5 here is that we have good control over e5, meaning he can't just push past. No, since he's played f3 instead of f4, he's not going to be able to do that. We have good control over d5, which here we have 1, 2 defenders, and he really only has one within the face of the pawn because of this pen here. And so once we play d5 and break down this center, we have a really pretty excellent position, and we don't have to fear the attack so much because of the open lines in the center. This pawn storm on the king side is not going to be so strong. White really needs to have a relatively fixed center in order for this kingside pawn storm to be really successful. And with the center being more open, it's just not as successful for him here. So anyway, I hope that you guys found this game instructive. I really enjoyed it. It was nice to see a lot of the traps and tricks involved with this this bishop b4 line against the English attack. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I'll be back later with some more examples of black playing d5 in the Sicilian. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.